Have you ever wondered what happens when you spend your whole life chasing money? When your days are measured in bank statements and your nights in counting gains? When you've made wealth your god and success your prayer? Padre Pio saw it. The Capuchin friar with bleeding hands who spent 50 years bearing the wounds of Christ. The man who heard 5 million confessions between 1918 and 1968. He didn't just see what money does to your soul while you're alive, he saw what happens after. If you value documented stories of the Catholic saints like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Bernard Ruffin's 3 editions of Padre Pio, The True Story, published originally in 1982, revised in 1991, and expanded again in 2018, combined with testimonies archived by the Capuchin friars at San Giovanni Rotondo, and documented in The Padre St. Pio of Pietrelcina, testimonies by Father Marcelino Iacenzanero, published through Our Lady. Of Grace Capuchin Friary. These aren't popular internet summaries. These are sworn testimonies taken under oath by church investigators, letters preserved in the Vatican archives, and eyewitness accounts from the friars who lived beside him for decades. Now back to the information. Francesco Forgione was born May 25, 1887, in Pietrelcina, a farming village south of Naples where dust covered everything and poverty was the only certainty most families knew. His father Grazio worked as a cloth merchant but barely earned enough to feed 8 children. His mother Pica came from nothing. They owned almost nothing. A few acres, a small house, faith that filled every crack. At 5 years old, Francesco told his mother he wanted to serve God, not when he grew up. Now, by 10, his parents knew he meant it. Grazio left for America in 1903 to earn money for Francesco's education. He worked farms in Pennsylvania and New York, sending every spare dollar back across the Atlantic so his son could enter the Capuchin order. Grazio labored in a foreign country for years, so Francesco could own nothing. At 15, Francesco entered the novitiate at Morcone. He took the name Pio. August 10, 1910, he was ordained, Padre Pio, from that day until he died. September 23, 1968, he lived in a cell measuring 4 meters by 3 meters, 4 bare walls, no decoration, no comfort. When someone tried to give him a painting of the Blessed Mother, he refused it. Only when his superior ordered him in obedience did he hang it above his bed. His clothes were always worn, patched, old. He refused new robes. He refused a cushioned chair in his confessional, even though he sat there 15 to 19 hours straight in the early years. He refused a heater in winter, even when the cold made his hands bleed worse. From 1916 to 1945, he lived in that same small cell at San Giovanni Rotondo. Nothing extra, nothing soft, nothing that wasn't strictly needed for survival and prayer. He saw people every day who lived the opposite way. Wealthy Italians who climbed the mountain to the friary wearing fur coats and gold jewelry. Businessmen from Rome and Milan in tailored suits who wanted his blessing on their ventures. Women dripping with pearls who knelt in his confessional to confess sins they didn't really want to stop committing. He saw them all. He knew what they were made of. One wealthy woman came to confession regularly through the 1920s. She confessed the same attachments every week. Expensive clothes, lavish dinners, jewelry, servants, a life built on appearances and comfort. Padre Pio listened. Each time she confessed, she promised to simplify. Each time she returned, nothing had changed. She still wore the furs, still hosted the parties, still measured her worth by what she owned. One day in confession, she asked him what he thought about her spiritual life. Padre Pio looked at her through the wooden screen. His voice was quiet, but it cut. He said, "You love your possessions more than you love God. If you had to choose between your jewelry box and the Blessed Sacrament, I know which one you would save from a fire." She left crying, but she came back. 3 weeks later, still wearing the pearls. Padre Pio's spiritual director, Father Agostino, kept detailed letters from Pio describing his interior life. In 1910, when Pio was only 23, he wrote asking permission to offer himself as a victim soul for sinners and souls in purgatory. He wrote, "This desire has grown continuously in my heart until now it has become a powerful passion. I want Jesus to lay on me the punishments prepared for sinners and for souls in purgatory, even multiplying them 100-fold, as long as he converts sinners and quickly releases souls from purgatory." He meant it. For 58 years he woke at 2:30 in the morning to pray. He celebrated Mass, sometimes for hours bleeding from his hands and feet and side. Then he went to the confessional. 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, some days 19 hours straight, hearing sins, calling out lies, sending impenitent sinners away, weeping for the ones who were truly sorry. In the early days of his priesthood, before his reputation spread across Italy, Padre Pio could spend longer with each penitent. The average confession lasted 3 to 5 minutes. but some lasted longer, especially when someone came with their life built on the wrong foundation. One man came in 1919, a merchant from Foggia. He'd made his fortune selling grain during the Great War. While soldiers died in trenches and families starved, he'd bought low and sold high. He wasn't breaking any laws. He was just good at business. That's what he told himself. He came to confession because his wife insisted. She'd heard about the priest with the wounds, and she wanted her husband to receive a blessing. The merchant knelt in the confessional and started listing small sins, impatience with servants, a few lies to customers. Nothing major, Padre Pio interrupted him. You didn't come here to confess. You came to get a blessing so your business keeps growing. You think if the priest with the stigmata blesses you, God will make you even richer. The merchant was stunned. He stammered something about providing for his family. Padre Pio said, How many families went hungry so yours could eat cake? How many mothers watched their children die while you counted your profit? You call it business. God calls it something else. The merchant tried to defend himself. The market set the prices. Supply and demand. Economics. He was just following the rules everyone else followed. Padre Pio leaned close to the screen. His voice dropped to a whisper. When you die and stand before Christ, you can explain supply and demand to him. See if he accepts that answer. No absolution. The merchant left shaking. According to testimony recorded by Father Giuseppe Orlando, one of the friars, the merchant came back 6 times over the next month. Each time, Padre Pio sent him away. Come back when you're ready to make it right, he said. Finally, the merchant returned and told Padre Pio he'd donated half his fortune to widows and orphans. Half. Everything he'd earned from war profiteering. Gone. Padre Pio gave him absolution. Then he said, That's the easy part. Now you have to change how you think about money. If you go back to worshiping it, what you gave away won't save you. In 1922, Bishop Alberto Costa of Melfi came to San Giovanni Rotondo with 5 friars to investigate reports about Padre Pio. The bishop asked him directly if he had ever seen souls from purgatory. Padre Pio answered, I have seen so many of them that they don't scare me anymore. He told them about a winter night earlier that year. Snow covered everything. He was sitting alone by the fireplace in the friary, praying after everyone had gone to bed. Suddenly, an old man was sitting next to him. Padre Pio couldn't figure out how he got in. Every door was locked. The man wore old-fashioned clothes, a cloak from 50 years earlier. Padre Pio asked, Who are you? What do you want? The man said, I am Pietro di Mauro, son of Nicola. I died in this friary on September 18th, 1908, in cell number 4. It was a poorhouse then. I fell asleep in bed with a lit cigar. The mattress caught fire. I died, suffocated and burned. I'm still in purgatory. I need one holy mass to be freed. God permitted me to come ask you for help. Padre Pio said, Rest assured, tomorrow I will celebrate Mass for your liberation. He walked the old man to the door that was locked. The next day he went to the town hall with another friar and searched the records. September 18th, 1908. Pietro di Mauro died in a fire in cell 4, exactly as the man had said. Padre Pio celebrated the Mass. Later he told the bishop and the friars, I still have a wound in my heart. I could have sent him to paradise immediately the night he appeared. Instead, he had to stay one more night in the flames of purgatory. One night in the flames, for a man who died by accident. But there were other stories, darker stories, about souls who stayed much longer. If you value content about the saints based on documented Catholic history like this, subscribe. Also, leave a comment telling us from which city you're hearing this. Now back to the information. Father Joseph Pius, who later became one of Padre Pio's closest collaborators, recorded Pio saying, More souls of the dead from purgatory than souls of the living climb this mountain to attend my masses and seek my prayers. The friars at San Giovanni Rotondo would sometimes hear singing late at night. Beautiful voices, full choir when everyone was supposed to be asleep. They went to Padre Pio to ask what was happening. He was deep in prayer. They had to shake him to get his attention. He looked at them confused and said, Why are you all so surprised? Those are the voices of the angels, taking souls from purgatory to paradise. But not all souls went to paradise quickly. Cleonis Morcaldi, one of Padre Pio's spiritual daughters, said, There has been no other saint who, every time he was asked, would tell if a soul had been saved, if it had gone to paradise or purgatory, and say the day and hour of the liberation. She meant he could see it. He knew. In 1943, Gerardo de Caro had long conversations with Padre Pio. He wrote in his notes, Padre Pio had exact knowledge of the state of a soul after death, including the duration of the pain until reached total purification. Not guesses, exact knowledge. Padre Pio told him, We need to pray for the souls in purgatory. We cannot believe how much they can do for us through the gratitude they have for those who pray for them. Then he said something that stuck with Gerardo for the rest of his life. The prayers of the souls in purgatory are much more efficacious before God because they pray while suffering. In 1945, Fra Modestino, another spiritual son, asked Padre Pio to compare the difference between fire on earth and the flames of purgatory. Padre Pio said, "They compare like fresh water and boiling water." Fresh water, boiling water. That's the difference between the worst pain you can imagine on earth and the lightest pain in purgatory. Fra Modestino's father died suddenly that same year. Modestino went to Padre Pio in grief to ask if his father was saved. Padre Pio welcomed him with affection, gave him condolences, and then said, "He was the son of guilt. He has to serve his sentence. Purgatory." Modestino asked if his family should have Gregorian masses celebrated for his father's soul. Padre Pio said, "If your family is in a position to do it, just say it." Modestino went back to Pietrelcina and worked. He walked the countryside, gathering offerings. He offered every step, every effort, every mortification for his father's soul. After a few months, Padre Pio called Fra Giovanni Iamaroni and told him, "Tell Fra Modestino that his father is safe. He was saved by his prayers and his intentions. Now he is in heaven." His father was saved, but he needed help. He needed his son's prayers, his sacrifices, his work. Without them, who knows how long he would have burned. The years after World War II brought massive change to Italy, the economic miracle they called it. Between 1950 and 1963, Italy transformed from a devastated agricultural country into an industrial powerhouse. Factories opened in Milan, Turin, Rome. Cars rolled off assembly lines. Refrigerators appeared in homes that had nothing 10 years earlier. Televisions, washing machines, consumer goods everywhere. Wealth poured into the country. The middle class exploded. People who'd eaten bread and water through the war suddenly had choices. They could buy things. They could accumulate. They could measure their success by what they owned. Ruffin's biography records that Padre Pio saw rampant materialism and immorality all around him. He watched it happen from his mountain monastery. He saw the cars climbing the road to San Giovanni Rotondo getting nicer every year. Fiats gave way to Alfa Romeos. Simple dresses gave way to expensive fashions. Gold watches appeared on wrists that had been bare a decade before. The confessional changed, too. In the 20s and 30s, people confessed sins of survival. Stealing food, lying to get work, desperation sins. By the 50s and 60s, they confessed sins of prosperity, adultery, greed, obsession with status, ignoring the poor while throwing money at luxuries. Padre Pio heard it all. His face grew harder year by year. He said once, "Today's society does not pray. That is why it is falling apart." He told his spiritual children again and again, "He who attaches himself to the earth remains attached to it. It is by violence that we must leave it. It is better to detach oneself a little at a time, rather than all at once. Let us always think of heaven." Violence, that's the word he used. You have to rip yourself away from earthly things, or they will keep you chained forever. He wrote to his spiritual children, "In order that we may willingly accept the tribulations lavished on us by divine mercy, let us keep our gaze fixed on the heavenly home reserved for us. Let us withdraw our gaze from those good things which are visible to our eyes, by which I mean worldly goods, the sight of which fascinates the heart." Worldly goods fascinate the heart. That's what money does. It hypnotizes you. It makes you think you're building security when you're actually building a prison. People came to San Giovanni Rotondo from all over Italy. Rich people, poor people. In 1962 alone, 83,035 women and 19,837 men registered for confession with Padre Pio. An average of 273 people per day, many of them wealthy, many of them empty inside despite their bank accounts. By the 1950s, the system for confession had become highly organized because the crowds were so massive. The Capuchins implemented a ticket system in 1950. People would arrive and get a number. They might wait 10 days for their turn. Some people rented rooms in town and waited weeks just for 3 minutes with Padre Pio. The poor slept on church floors. The rich rented entire houses. Padre Pio could read their souls. He knew before they opened their mouths what they'd done and what they were hiding. Testimonies from penitents reveal he was severe with those who weren't convinced of the gravity of their sin or weren't determined to abandon it. He would repeat, "It is a sin, it is a sin. If you do not want to stop offending God, what are you doing here?" He called one man a pig and threw him out of the confessional. The man was a wealthy businessman who confessed adultery but had no intention of ending the affair. Padre Pio saw through him instantly. The man left furious, shouting about being insulted by a priest. But 2 years later he came back, broken, his marriage destroyed, his business failing. He confessed everything with real sorrow. Padre Pio gave him absolution and told him, "Now you know what it costs to serve two masters." But with those who were truly repentant, with those who wanted to change but were weak, he was paternal, understanding, encouraging. He knew the difference between a soul struggling against sin and a soul comfortable with sin. One he helped, the other he sent away. Father Pasquale Cataneo came to confession in the late 1950s. He was a priest, not a wealthy man, but his testimony shows how Padre Pio could read thoughts. On the bus ride to San Giovanni Rotondo, Father Pasquale examined his conscience thoroughly, preparing for confession. Near the end of the journey, as the monastery came into view, he had a discouraging thought. The spiritual life at times seems like trying to climb glass. Just a thought. He didn't say it out loud. He made his confession, received absolution, stood to leave. As he turned one last time to look at Padre Pio, the saint smiled with an amused look and said, "So, the spiritual life seems like climbing glass, eh?" Father Pasquale was flabbergasted. He couldn't speak. Padre Pio had plucked the exact thought from his mind. From that moment on, Father Pasquale knew without doubt that Padre Pio was enlightened by the Holy Spirit to guide souls. If he could read a passing thought, imagine what he saw in souls who lived for money. Imagine what he perceived in people whose every decision revolved around profit and accumulation and status. He saw it all, the calculations, the compromises. The slow hardening of hearts that happens when wealth becomes the measure of everything. The official church decree on Padre Pio's heroic virtues, published December 18, 1997, states, "He exercised the spirit of poverty by total detachment of himself from worldly goods, from conveniences, and from honors. Despite being responsible for managing significant funds for the construction of Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the hospital he founded that opened May 5, 1956, Padre Pio remained utterly detached from wealth. Millions of lire flowed through his hands, donations from all over the world. Prayer groups in Italy, Ireland, the United States, Australia sent money. Some sent thousands. Some sent everything they had. By the time construction began in 1947, enough money had been raised to build a modern hospital from nothing on a hilltop in one of the poorest regions of Italy. Padre Pio supervised everything. He blessed the ground on January 9, 1947, before the first shovel broke earth. He blessed the workers. He visited the construction site regularly, even though climbing the hill exhausted him. He celebrated Mass on the front portico at the inauguration. The hospital opened with 250 beds and basic equipment. Today, it has over 1,000 beds, employs thousands, treats hundreds of thousands of patients every year. It's one of the most advanced hospitals in southern Italy, but Padre Pio never kept a single coin for himself. For him, money was never the goal. It was simply a means to serve the common good. Divine providence was his only guide. Every success he achieved was a gift from God, not a personal accomplishment. That's what the decree says, not personal accomplishment, gift from God. He wore the same patched habit, slept in the same bare cell, ate simple food, barely enough to survive. His fellow friars said he often ate nothing but bread and water for days. He fasted constantly, not occasionally during Lent, constantly, all year. Every year, for his entire adult life. One friar, Father Alessio, tried to measure how much Padre Pio ate in a typical day. Breakfast was a small cup of weak coffee. Lunch was a few spoonfuls of vegetables, sometimes a piece of fruit. Dinner was similar, often less. Total calories probably didn't exceed 500, maybe 600 on feast days. Medical doctors who examined him couldn't explain how he survived. One doctor calculated that based on his activity level, he should have been consuming at least 2,000 calories daily. He was consuming a quarter of that. But he didn't just fast from food. He fasted from comfort, from rest, from anything that made life easier. He told his spiritual director, the mortification of the flesh must be constant and steady, not intermittent, and must last for one's whole life. Why? Because, as he wrote, those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Anyone who wants to be a true Christian must mortify his flesh for no other reason than devotion to Jesus, who for love of us mortified his entire body on the cross. He lived it every single day for 58 years. And he did it while managing a massive building project and hearing confessions 8 to 10 hours daily and celebrating Mass and praying for hours before dawn, all on 500 calories a day. Meanwhile, wealthy penitents would kneel in his confessional and complain about minor inconveniences. One woman in the 1950s confessed that she was struggling spiritually because her new house didn't have enough closet space for her clothes. Padre Pio reportedly stared at her through the screen and said, "Maybe God is telling you something." Another man, a businessman from Rome, confessed that he was too busy with work to attend daily Mass. He owned 3 factories. He employed over 500 people. Surely God understood that his work was important. Padre Pio said, "So your factories are more important than God. What happens when God decides he doesn't need your factories?" The man tried to explain. His employees depended on him. The economy depended on businesses like his. He was doing important work. Padre Pio cut him off. "You're doing important work for yourself. You're building a kingdom and you're the king. God is an afterthought. Come back when you've figured out who actually runs the universe. No absolution." Again, these stories spread. By the 1960s, wealthy Italians knew that confessing to Padre Pio wasn't like confessing to their comfortable parish priests who nodded and gave gentle advice. Padre Pio demanded real conversion. He demanded that you dismantle the idols you'd built. If money was your god, he made you choose. Keep the god or get absolution. Not both. Some people chose the money. They left and never came back. Others, like the woman with too many clothes, came back different. She sold half her wardrobe and gave the money to the poor. She returned to tell Padre Pio what she'd done. He smiled and said, "Now you have room for God." Then there's the other side. The souls who didn't change, the ones who couldn't let go. One testimony from the 1950s, recorded but not widely published, tells of a wealthy man from northern Italy who came to confession to Padre Pio. The man owned factories, textile mills. He was what you'd call successful, self-made, started with nothing, and built an empire. He came to San Giovanni Rotondo because his wife begged him to. She was a spiritual daughter of Padre Pio, and she was terrified for her husband's soul. The man entered the confessional. He knelt. He started his confession the way successful men often do, listing minor faults, small vanities, nothing serious, nothing that would require him to change his life. Padre Pio stopped him halfway through. According to the testimony, he said, "You're not here to confess. You're here to justify yourself. You've built your whole life on accumulating wealth and you think God is impressed. You pray to him like he's a business partner. You calculate your sins like profit and loss. You have no idea what you've done to your soul." The man was stunned. He tried to defend himself. He said he gave to charity. He employed hundreds of people. He supported the church financially. Padre Pio said, "Where is your treasure? Is it in heaven or in your factories?" "Well, you know the answer. So does God." The man left without absolution. He was furious. His wife later said he raged for 3 days, but something broke in him. He came back 2 weeks later. This time he confessed everything. The cutthroat deals, the employees he'd ruined, the families he'd destroyed to build his empire, the worship of success that had replaced worship of God. He wept. Padre Pio gave him absolution and told him, "Now rebuild what you destroyed. Use your wealth to serve God, not yourself. If you go back to the old way, I'll know, and you won't receive absolution from me again." The man changed. He sold one of his factories and used the money to build a home for disabled children in his hometown. He implemented profit sharing for his remaining employees. He cut his own salary to a fraction of what it had been. His business associates thought he'd lost his mind. But his wife said she finally recognized the man she'd married 30 years earlier, before the money changed him. That's what money does if you let it become your god. It doesn't just corrupt you while you're alive, it poisons your eternity. Padre Pio said once, "You will be surprised to find in paradise souls you'd never expected to be there." The flip side was true too. Some souls who seemed destined for heaven ended up nowhere near it. In 1958, Carmela Marocchino's brother, Padre Vittorio da Canossa, died suddenly on January 29th. She went to Padre Pio to ask why God had taken him so suddenly. Padre Pio said, "Do you know what Jesus did with your brother? Jesus went into the garden, and there were many flowers, and one was more beautiful than the others. He leaned toward the most beautiful and picked it." Carmela asked, "Is he saved?" Padre Pio said, "Yes, but we need to pray for him." Saved. But still needing prayers, still suffering, still being purified. That was a priest, a good man, a holy man, and even he needed help. What about the ones who weren't good? What about the ones who spent their lives chasing wealth and called it wisdom? Padre Pio never said explicitly what he saw happen to them, but his silence said enough. When asked about certain souls, he would simply look away. No answer, just a heavy silence that made people's blood run cold. Father Alessio, one of the friars who lived with Padre Pio for decades, recorded him saying once, "If people knew what awaits those who die attached to earthly things, they would tear their clothes and weep blood. Tear their clothes and weep blood." That phrase appears in only one testimony, handwritten by Father Alessio in 1964, preserved in the friary archives. Father Alessio had asked Padre Pio why he was so severe with wealthy penitents. Padre Pio didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the valley below for a long time. Then he said those words, "If people knew what awaits those who die attached to earthly things, they would tear their clothes and weep blood." Father Alessio pressed him. "What do you mean, Padre? What awaits them?" Padre Pio turned to him. His eyes were full of tears. He said, "I've seen it. I cannot speak of it. Pray for them. That's all we can do. Pray they wake up before it's too late." That's all he would say. But Father Alessio wrote that Padre Pio's face had changed. He looked haunted for the rest of that day. Padre Pio was asked many times if he suffered like the souls in purgatory. He said, "Yes, the souls in purgatory don't suffer more than I do. I'm sure I'm not wrong on this." He bore the stigmata from September 20th, 1918, until his death 50 years later. His hands bled every day for 50 years. The wounds smelled like perfume, but they never healed, never got infected, never stopped bleeding. The pain was constant. Unimaginable. Doctors examined him repeatedly through the years and found no medical explanation. He said his suffering equaled purgatory, daily, for 5 decades, and he chose it. He asked for it. He offered himself as a victim soul so others might be spared. Most people never make that offer. Most people live for comfort, for success, for security, for the accumulation of things that will turn to dust the moment they stop breathing. They build kingdoms out of paper and call themselves rich. Then they die and discover what real poverty looks like. December 30th, 1937, Padre Pio was praying in the choir with the other friars. Suddenly he said, "Let's pray for our provincial father, Padre Bernardo Apicella, who is in agony." Nobody knew Padre Bernardo was sick. The next day, they received word that he had died suddenly the night before. Exactly when Padre Pio said it, he knew. He saw beyond the veil. He saw what was happening in the spiritual realm, while everyone else saw only the physical world. One day, the doctor who regularly examined Padre Pio mentioned a deceased relative. Padre Pio said calmly, "I'm praying for the good death of my great-great-grandfather." The doctor was confused, but he died more than 100 years ago. Padre Pio said, "Remember that for God there is no past and no future. Everything is present. So God made use at that time of the prayers I'm saying now." That's how it works. Prayer transcends time. Your choices today affect eternity. What you worship now determines where you spend forever. Padre Pio told his spiritual children over and over, "Love and practice simplicity and humility, and don't worry about the opinion of the world. Because if this world had nothing to say against us, we would not be true servants of God. The world praises wealth. God measures something else entirely." On September 23rd, 1968, at 1:30 in the morning, Padre Pio died. He was 81 years old. His face was serene. He held a rosary in his hands. The stigmata disappeared from his hands and feet and side within hours of his death, leaving no scars, no trace they'd ever been there. 50 years of bleeding wounds vanished as if they'd never existed. More than 500,000 people attended his canonization on June 16, 2002. Pope John Paul II called him a generous dispenser of divine mercy and a marked representative of the stigmata of our Lord. But the most telling detail isn't in the official documents. It's in the testimony of those who knew him. Cleanus Morcaldi said, "Every time someone asked Padre Pio about a soul who had died, he would either say they were saved and in heaven, or he would fall silent and turn away." That silence was more terrifying than any words. She said people learned not to ask twice. The silence meant the answer was too horrible to speak out loud. What happens to a soul who builds their whole life around money? Padre Pio saw it. He never described it in detail, but he said enough to make people change their entire lives. He said, "1,000 years of enjoying human glory is not worth even an hour spent sweetly communing with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. 1,000 years of glory, not worth 1 hour with God. Everything you own will be taken from you the second you die. The only question is what you built that death can't touch. And for most people, the answer is nothing." When Padre Pio's cell was preserved after his death, they found almost nothing inside. The bed was bare wood. The blanket was thin and patched. There was a small table, a chair, a crucifix, the painting of Mary he'd been forced to hang. That's it. 4 decades of living in that room, and he left behind nothing but the essentials. Meanwhile, the hospital he built still operates today with over 1,000 beds, employing thousands of people, treating hundreds of thousands of patients every year. Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza has expanded multiple times since his death. It now includes research facilities, specialized cancer treatment centers, cardiac surgery units. It's become a teaching hospital affiliated with universities across Italy. The hospital remains. The money that built it came and went, forgotten. What he gave away multiplied. What he could have kept for himself would have turned to ash. That's the lesson. Padre Pio saw what happens to souls who worship wealth, and he spent his entire life warning people to run the other direction. Not because wealth itself is evil, but because when you make it your God, it devours you. First your heart, then your soul, then your eternity. You can't serve both God and money. Christ said it, Padre Pio lived it, and the souls in purgatory prove it every single day. But here's the part that should terrify you. Padre Pio didn't just warn the obviously greedy, he warned comfortable people, middle-class people, people who thought they had it figured out, people who gave to charity and went to Mass and considered themselves good Catholics, while still measuring their lives by their bank accounts and their possessions and their status. Those were the ones who shocked him most, because they didn't think they had a problem. The openly greedy knew they were sinning, but the comfortable ones, they'd convinced themselves that God approved of their lifestyle. They'd rationalized every purchase, every luxury, every upgrade. They weren't greedy. They were just enjoying God's blessings. Padre Pio would look at them and say, "Where is your treasure?" That question cut through every rationalization, because everyone knows the answer. You know where your treasure is by where your thoughts go, what you think about when you wake up, what keeps you up at night, what you work hardest to protect. That's your treasure. And if it's anything other than God, you're in danger. When Padre Pio died, his body was examined by doctors who'd followed his case for decades. The stigmata had completely disappeared. No wounds, no scars. No sign they'd ever existed except in thousands of photographs and the testimony of millions of witnesses. His hands were smooth, unmarked, as if 50 years of bleeding had never happened. But there was something else. His body didn't decay. When they exhumed him in 2008, 40 years after his death, the body was in fair condition. Fair condition, 4 decades in a tomb, and he looked like he'd been buried months earlier. They touched up his face, dressed him in his habit with gold thread, put him in a crystal casket. He's on display now in a golden crypt under the new church at San Giovanni Rotondo. Millions visit every year. They file past the casket and look at the body of the man who saw what most people never see, who knew what most people never know, who warned what most people never hear. The documentation is there. The testimonies are archived. The letters are preserved. Bernard Ruffin spent years compiling it all, interviewing friars who lived with Padre Pio, examining church records, reading sworn statements taken by Vatican investigators. 3 editions of his biography, each one adding more detail as more documents became available. The facts are undeniable. Padre Pio lived in radical poverty by choice. He managed millions in donations without keeping anything. He warned countless souls about the danger of attachment to wealth. He saw souls from purgatory and knew exactly why they suffered and how long. He could read hearts and thoughts. He knew when someone was lying in confession. He knew when someone worshipped money instead of God. And he spent 50 years trying to wake people up before it was too late. Most didn't listen. They couldn't imagine that their comfortable lives were spiritually dangerous. They couldn't believe that God actually meant what Christ said about the rich and the kingdom of heaven. They thought the rules didn't apply to them because they weren't explicitly breaking commandments. But Padre Pio knew better. He'd seen the other side. He'd talked to souls who thought the same thing while they were alive, who rationalized and justified and convinced themselves God understood, who found out too late that God does understand. He understands perfectly. That's the problem. You're building your eternity right now, every choice, every priority, every time you decide between God and something else. You're constructing the place where you'll spend forever. And if you're building on a foundation of wealth and comfort and accumulation, you're building on sand. The first wave will wash it all away, and you'll have nothing left. Padre Pio saw it happen, over and over, for 50 years. And the only thing he could do was warn people while they still had time to change.